So many times, stories are heard differently than they are told. I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to tell you a very popular story, but from a different perspective. The story is about a boy who has great aspirations. He seeks out a prestigious job, he outshines all of his competition, and he finds love and friendship along the way. But then he falls into a depression filled with fear, shame, and hatred. He ends up losing his job, his loved ones, and his life. Loss after loss after loss. This boy is Anakin Skywalker from Star Wars. Now, it might seem like a stretch, but through my personal life experiences, as well as the extensive research I have done, I have found a telling similarity between Anakin Skywalker's fight with the dark side and those who struggle with depression. In 2017, the National Institute for Mental Health did a study and a survey where they found that 3.5% of the entire US population had suffered severe impairment due to a major depressive episode, just specifically in that year. I know personally I've struggled with depression for over 5 years. However, at the beginning of the semester, I found success in conquering my depression. The best way I can explain it to you is by saying that failure is necessary to find success against depression. In order to show you this, I will show you how depression changes the brain, how depression causes a downward spiral of failures, and how recovery requires a decisive turning point. And to illustrate each of these points, I will use a Star Wars quote because they're fantastic. Starting with Emperor Palpatine, who said, "The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural." Now, this basically just means that depression is changing the brain. Major depressive disorder, or MDD, is the formal name for depression. In order to be diagnosed, you have to use the DSM, which is the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual for Mental Disorders, which is designated by the American Psychiatric Association. It's a mouthful. However, in their most recent update from May of 2013, they say that in order to be diagnosed, one must have symptoms of sadness, irritability, sleeplessness, sudden weight change, persistent thoughts of death or suicide, or anhedonia, which is the inability to feel joy. One must have these symptoms for more than 2 weeks in order to be diagnosed with depression. But what is actually happening to cause these symptoms? What is happening and changing in the chemistry of the brain? According to a September 2014 article, Dr. Gregory Fritz, who is a professor of psychiatry at Brown University, said that instead of viewing depression as the creation from a chemical imbalance, we need to understand that it's so much more than that. There are many known factors and unknown factors, both genetic and environmental, and to label everything as a chemical imbalance would be making light of the complexity that is depression. So while we don't know what the cause of depression is, we do know some of the effects that it has on the brain. In March of 2011, two professors of psychiatry, McQueen and Fraudel, found that of 2,000 participants, those who had MDD, or major depressive disorder, had a 4 to 6% decrease in the volume of their hippocampus, which is the highly stress-sensitive region of the brain that sits right above the brainstem. What they also found about these participants is they had memory impairment that was directly related to the function of the hippocampus. For those of you who don't know, the hippocampus is responsible for translating short-term memories into long-term memories. However, if you have depression, it's very difficult for you to translate good short-term memories into good long-term memories. An example, say I'm having just an awful day, but I had a really great day a week ago. If I have depression, it's very hard for me to remember that day or any other day, which makes all that I'm dealing with so much more dreadful. Depression doesn't only negatively skew our memories, it also negatively skews our perception of success. According to an article published in August 2017 to the BMC Psychiatric Journal, 140 participants were tested to see how they would respond to success and failure. Those who were mentally healthy found that when they succeeded, they took pride in themselves. However, when they failed, it was not their fault. The exact opposite was true for those who were mentally ill. When they succeeded, they thought it was some kind of fluke, and when they failed, they took it personally. So it's very obvious that something wrong is happening in the brain of those who have MDD. There's something that's impairing their mind, causing them to make unhealthy decisions. Unhealthy brains would make sense to make unhealthy decisions. Which brings me into my second point and my second quote from Master Yoda, who says, "Once you start down the dark path, forever it will dominate your destiny." Now, basically what this means is that failure causes a downward spiral, depression causes a downward spiral to failure. I'll give you an example. In September of this year, a study was done in Turkey by Dr. Merve Onat of 97 adolescent participants. What he found was that those who had MDD spent far more time on the internet and far less time getting sleep than any of the other participants. Now, lack of sleep is known to cause depressive symptoms, which is known to cause people to choose lack of sleep, which is known to cause, and it's a downward cycle. The same thing can be said for artificial interaction versus actual social interaction. So it's a downward spiral in that case, which causes more and more depression. Another downward spiral is for those who try and self-medicate via alcohol or drug abuse. What's crazy is that in 2015, the National Institute for Mental Health, for Drug Abuse found that those who had a mental disorder were twice as likely to abuse drugs. This is insane. Not only are people fighting in their head everything that they're trying to do, trying to figure out the healthier alternative, they're also fighting the stigma and the culture, especially in the US. American culture is extremely hostile and fearful for those who are mentally ill. But why is this? According to Dr. Fretweiss, who is a professor of political science in the University of New Orleans, and his May 2018 book on American exceptionalism, which again is a mouthful, he talks about how Americans view themselves as a superpower with lots to lose. And because they have a lot to lose, they are scared of any weaknesses that are very obvious to them. This is then confirmed in Dr. Pesky Salato's article that was published to the Journal of Health and Social Behavior, where it was found that 68% of Americans do not want someone who is mentally ill marrying into their families. 68%, and 58% don't want someone who's mentally ill in their workplaces, which is obviously going to cause people to closet themselves off, not reveal that they have these illnesses, and they're not going to go and get help. So as we can see, people are hitting wall after wall after wall, unhealthy choice after unhealthy choice after unhealthy choice. And eventually they hit rock bottom where they have to choose whether they're going to make an unhealthy choice even though it's not working for them, or try and make a healthy choice even though it's so foreign to the brain. Which this brings me to my last point and my final quote from Master Yoda again, who says, "Do or do not, there is no try." What I mean by this is recovery requires a decisive turning point. So what does this rock bottom look like? In a January 2018 Notre Dame article, we are able to understand the terms of this. The terms are called cognitive destruction and identity play. Cognitive destruction is when you hit rock bottom and you feel like you have no emotion and no hope for the future. However, identity play is where you feel, once you've hit rock bottom, that you have everywhere to go. You have infinite possibilities. You're a blank sheet of paper. So how does this translate to those with MDD? Well, those with MDD, they can choose to continue to pursue these unhealthy choices, or they can choose to move forward and choose healthy alternatives that they've heard, but it's still foreign to their brain. But what causes them to make one choice or the other? And how can we, as friends, help them? Well, in order to understand how to help them, we have to understand what the 4 dimensions of recovery are. These 4 dimensions were created by the CDC, the National Institute for Health, the National Institute for Mental Health, and many other associations, and was most recently compiled in this past March of this year. What these dimensions are, the first one is health. And basically what this means is to prioritize physical and emotionally healthy situations in your life. The second one is home, which is to make sure that you have a safe and stable environment that you're putting yourself around. The third is purpose, which is making sure that you're prioritizing meaningful activities and expressing yourself creatively. And the fourth is community, which is making sure that you're building up a social structure with the relationships that you have. So how can we help people choose this option? Well, we can empower them just as God empowers us as Christians. In Jeremiah 29:11, it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for prosperity and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." God wants us to be healthy, and he gives us purpose and community in his church. And as people who are friends with those who have MDD, and as physical representations of Christ on earth, we have to be determined to do something about this. So, what have we learned? Depression changes the brain, depression causes a downward spiral of failure, and recovery requires a decisive turning point. I know that when I was struggling and hit my rock bottom, when I was contemplating suicide 4 months ago, my family and my friends took an active role in my life. Some people don't have that luxury, and it is our responsibility. We need to prioritize making sure that we are empowering each other, we are creating healthy places, homes, community, we're pushing people towards purpose. Depression is an epidemic, and we have to take responsibility, and we have to take action.